March 14th, 2020. For us at Acadia University, that was the day that COVID-19 officially turned our world upside down. We, the Acadia University Singers, were about to begin a rehearsal for a choir trip we were supposed to go on when the news came that our campus will be closing and classes going online indefinitely. Over the days that followed, our vibrant university community turned into a ghost town. Fear, loneliness, anxiety began to set in, and over the following weeks, the news only grew worse. For us as musicians, one of the things that made this so difficult was that we couldn't do what we normally would to process such difficult emotions. We couldn't sing together, and we were left wondering when and if we would ever be a choir again.
Will the circle be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by? There's a better home awaiting if we try, Lord, if we try.
The COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating impact on choirs, indeed on the entire global performing arts community. As choristers, our art is one that involves the transmission of air and being together, often standing closely, two practices that have had to be severely limited in order to help prevent the spread of a virus that's carried by aerosols. But COVID-19 has also proven that musicians are a determined lot and that humanity needs music. In the weeks following the global lockdowns that began early in 2020, virtual choir videos began popping up on YouTube with increasing frequency. Now, virtual choir itself is not a new to COVID phenomenon. The technological capability has existed for a while and was brought to popular attention in 2010 by Eric Whitaker's first virtual choir project, Luxurumque. In fact, Whitaker's virtual choir 6, Sing Gently, was launched early on amid the pandemic and attracted a record number of participants, over 17,000 singers from around the world. What is new is that previously, virtual choir was regarded as a novel way to unite singers across a distance for the occasional special choir project. Now, because of COVID, it has been adopted as a working methodology out of necessity by choirs that otherwise would rehearse and perform together in person. Under lockdown conditions, virtual choir offers one of the only viable means by which choirs can continue to make music together. Locked out of our own rehearsal hall, the Acadia University Singers and I embarked on the Isolated Bodies United Voices project. Beginning in June and throughout the summer of 2020, we met together regularly online to rehearse and record 4 choral songs, ultimately for the purpose of trying out virtual choir. Now, as you can easily imagine, the experience of singing in a virtual choir is markedly different than that of singing in a traditional in-person choir. With virtual choir, you learn and perform your part in isolation, never hearing your voice blend with those of your fellow musicians while you are singing. Only at the very end, through significant technological mediation, does the choir retroactively get to hear the music they created by singing together. Virtual choir can be time-consuming, labor-intensive, and lonely, and for many of us, it represents a much less desirable means to create and participate in the art that we love. The purpose of this project was in no way to suggest that virtual choir could ever replace in-person choir, nor to deny the necessity of scientific research to develop safe ways of singing together amid the pandemic. Nonetheless, the fact remains that under total lockdown, there are few options other than virtual choir. So, given the choice between virtual or no choir at all, we have sought to better understand the process and the experience of choosing virtual choir. Inevitably, there are aspects of choral technique and pedagogy that simply do not work and are lost when choirs rehearse online and record their parts in isolation. The questions we are asking are, what aspects of our musicianship can we continue to develop as we sing from our own separate homes? Are there any new insights, new skills that we might actually gain from singing choral music in this unconventional manner? Any new ideas or approaches that we might actually want to carry forward when we can finally sing together in person again? And what will be the impact of virtual choir on our choral communities? Choir, after all, isn't just about singing together. It's about being together and about being part of something that is bigger than any one person alone. Can online rehearsals and flashy videos sustain the sense of engagement and community that is an essential part of the choral experience? Through our process of addressing these questions, we've created a choral program of 4 virtual choir videos that collectively narrate our COVID journey. The text of each song speaks to a different facet of our pandemic experience, and we've created videos that further illuminate our response to and the impact of these unprecedented times. Before we share our program and our reflections, we'd like to express our gratitude to Acadia's Division of Research and Graduate Studies. This project was made possible by an institutional grant funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada and awarded through Acadia's Research Department, and we are very grateful to our university for their support of arts-based research. We'd also like to thank Dr. Larry Nickel of Cypress Choral, J. David Moore of Fresh Air Music, and the publishers at Walton Music for their permission to use their choral publications in our videos. As project director, I'd like to extend a particular thank you to Ellen Torrey for her work as our lead research assistant, and to Luc Poirier, who did all the audio mixing and mastering for our virtual choir videos. And of course, I'd like to extend my deep gratitude to all the members of the Acadia University Singers for participating in a research project amid what was undeniably a very stressful and very challenging time in their lives. It certainly brought me great joy to see their smiling faces in the little squares on my screen throughout the summer. If for no other reason, I enjoyed virtual choir because it brought us together at a time when otherwise we would have been very far apart. Brandon, Breton, Camden, Chantel, Evan, Keegan, Kimberly, Luke Henderson, Meg, Mitch, Molly, and Morgandy were all scattered throughout various parts of Nova Scotia. Luc Poirier was in New Brunswick, Ellen in Quebec, Noah in Ontario, and Jessica moved to Ontario midway through our project. As we draw attention to our geographic dispersion and use settler names to refer to various parts of Turtle Island, we acknowledge that the places where we live and work are all the ancestral homes of Canada's First Peoples. And finally, we would like to thank you, our audience, for taking time out of your technology-saturated day to enjoy a moment of choral music with us.
Hi, my name is Luke Poirier. I'm a percussion student at Acadia University, and the thing that I love about choir is just singing in harmony together. Ever since a young age, my grandfather used to direct the choir at church back in Grand Dig, and my dad directs the choir here down in St. John, and so I just, got to love the choir and singing in harmony together.
For me, choir is a really, really big part of my life. I've been singing choir since I was like 8 or 9. I've never been without a choir. Ever. Sometimes I've had 3 or 4 on the go, so it was very weird for me to suddenly go from, at the point when we sent home, I was singing with 3 different choirs at that point in time, and then I was sent home to nothing.
As you could well imagine, getting a group of musicians into the same room, sharing ideas and sharing it in the same piece of music is a really important experience. Even singing on its own is a really personal form of expression. Singing is something that comes of us, that is very physically a part of ourselves, and so getting the chance to share that in person with other people I've always found to be really important. So of course, with the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns and distancing rules and everything that come along with it, any chance to make music in person evaporated really overnight.
How the pandemic affected me as a musician is just losing a lot of gigs in the scene. I play a lot of music in the scene down in St. John. I used to be part of a lot of bands, and now we're all working remotely, trying to release music and such and that. And it's kind of tough being a musician in the pandemic, and so I feel like as a musician, working remotely is probably the best resort to do it now, and hopefully pandemic will be over and we can start playing live music again.
I kind of miss being in a room with other people and also singing with them at the same time, hearing other people.
And as well, I found even that my own personal motivation in making music really diminished with the lockdown. You know, there were no people to make music with, there were no concerts to prepare for, there were no events going on. So I found it hard to motivate myself to even practice my own instruments or to practice singing.
I feel like I was really, really missing choir, especially when all of the scary news started coming out about, like, will we ever be able to sing again? Like, will people have to sing in, like, hamster bubbles to be able to be in the same room? So once I was able to be part of this project, it definitely was kind of like a bit of light in the choral world when all the scary news keeps coming out.
So I really did look forward to the chance to join a virtual choir. If for nothing else, to see other musicians and to get the chance to talk about music and to experience music again. So I'm very much looking forward to the experience and all that holds, and hope that we can uncover some information through the process as we're going through it.
Goin' Home is based on the Largo movement of Antonin Dvorak's New World Symphony. Composing in 1893, Dvorak wanted to create a distinctively American sound. To do so, he turned to influences from Indigenous and Black American folk song, the latter of which is particularly evident in the now famous Largo. 29 years later, in 1922, William Arms Fisher, one of Dvorak's pupils, adapted the opening melody of the Largo into a song for solo voice, with a text that he wrote, "Goin' home, I'm just goin' home." Fisher's adaptation soon became adapted itself, and today, Goin' Home is a beloved work for choirs. The arrangement that we learned was originally composed for Vancouver's Corleone by the late Diane Loomer, an outstanding figure in Canada's choral scene. With its warm, gentle melody and reassuring message, Goin' Home is often performed at memorial services as an offering of comfort. Its text can be interpreted as referring to the promised land, the idea that after a life of toil on earth, we'll be rewarded by being with our loved ones in heaven. For us in 2020, though, the words of Goin' Home took on a much more literal meaning, as we all found ourselves needing to take shelter in our own homes. In our video, we've tried to illuminate how we turn to our homes for safety, albeit with heavy hearts, and the various ways that we sought comfort amid the fear and isolation of COVID. It's important to remember, though, that Goin' Home isn't just about our own safety. It's about showing our care for frontline workers, essential service providers, and those most vulnerable to the ravages of COVID. As hard as it's been to sacrifice our social lives and daily activities, one of the ways that we can help our communities has been by going home.
Going home, going home.
For me, choirs have always been a very social and very collaborative environment. And so right away, I wondered how some of those elements would transfer into an online environment.
I've never taken part in any virtual choir experience such as this before. I'm looking at the whole thing with fresh eyes.
This is the first choir I've been in where we are having rehearsals through like video chats, and I don't know, I think it's kind of cool. It's definitely different.
I was very hesitant to say that that would work at the beginning, but so far I'm quite enjoying it.
Now, there are good and bad aspects that occur to me as I reflect on my experience thus far with this project. There are many good things to talk about. So, for example, you can do as many takes as you like to achieve your own personal perfection in your performance, which is very nice, as sometimes, things slip in live performance, and that doesn't have to happen with the virtual choir.
I also kind of like the idea of like following conducting video, because like you can practice following the conductor really well, whereas like that element of spontaneity, although it like creates magic in a real performance, it's like riskier.
I do have to enjoy the fact that I can come to choir rehearsals in my pajamas though, and no one notices.
First of all, you get to see people face to face, and it's nice to reconnect with my peers and Michelle. It's been a long time since we've all seen each other kind of like face to face.
I enjoyed this last week's meeting, knowing that there were people in the group who I haven't seen for a while and who I was excited to see, and to see their faces on the video chat was really cool, and to have just 2 minutes of casual conversation before we started working was really nice.
But what I found actually from our very first meeting was the simple act of meeting online, seeing other faces and other musicians, was in itself a really collaborative environment. You got the feeling that even though you weren't singing together as such, we were still talking about the music, we were still seeing how we're reacting to what we're doing. And I felt that in and of itself really did create some of that collaborative environment.
The ability to edit audio volume and the timbre of different audio, it gives you a lot of power over the performance, in theory.
My first impressions on being in this virtual choir is it's a super cool experience. I feel like I'm gonna learn a lot about myself, my singing.
I do think, because also I've been recording the practice files for the choir to use, I have to be very, very precise about cutoffs and making sure that like I know like what I'm looking at in terms of like the conducting, and just really having like a super, super clear sense of the technical aspects of the piece.
It definitely puts a lot of stress, but in a good way, in the sense that it only strives to make me a better musician and to know my lines better than I should sometimes. But it really is a nice learning experience for me to recognize how far I can push myself in order to achieve my goals.
Well, my favorite part is definitely seeing the videos at the end. I mean, that's the obvious answer, but it's really great to see it all put together at the very end.
It makes me really happy to see everyone's faces on the screen. It's almost like, it just feels like choir. Instead of just imagining everyone being there, you can actually see everyone's face, everyone's smiling, everyone's singing. It takes me back to actually sitting in a rehearsal, being able to see the video.
I'm not used to that perspective, being in a choir and then seeing everyone around you face to face. That it feels like I'm being put in the audience perspective, which is really interesting. It's nice to see everyone singing, but then I see myself and I'm like, oh no, don't show me that. But it's really cool to have the flipped perspective.
Another big thing was just hearing everybody, even when I'm singing like in an actual choir. I don't know, we're always in the back and you can't quite hear the sopranos and altos quite as much as you would through a recording, right, when everything's actually put to the correct amounts.
It's so wonderful to hear everyone in a choir, and it's so special because you don't get to have that in a live choir. You don't get to hear yourself very often unless you're recording it. it's just so lovely because, you know, you do this whole thing in isolation and it feels very removed from everybody else, and then you hear it, and you can hear all of your friends and all of your choir friends singing, and it's lovely, and I really, really enjoy it.
Although it hasn't always been easy, throughout the pandemic we've sought silver linings. Virtual choir is perhaps a great example. It might not be our preferred method of choral singing, but it at least allows us to continue making music together. A different type of silver lining? Well, I recall early on in the pandemic reading reports on the internet about how the global lockdowns were reducing human pollution, which in turn was causing the waters around Italy to clear, and dolphins had been spotted. Now, I think that some of those reports turned out to be unsubstantiated, but just the very idea that our restricted lifestyles could at least have a positive impact on our ailing planet was certainly a ray of hope amid what was otherwise a very dark time. And certainly, getting better in touch with nature has been a way of coping with the pandemic, and lockdown limitations have inspired many people to explore the wonders in their own backyards. For us Canadians, travel restrictions have meant that we've had to stick close to home, but in so doing, we've become better acquainted with the beautiful landscapes around us. And so, in the spirit of silver linings, the next piece on our program is Carol Ann Weaver's Generous Land. This piece calls us to put aside the cares and worries of the urban world and to revel in the beauty and diversity of Canada's natural environment. More importantly, though, it calls us to remember that the land isn't just beautiful. It is the very foundation of all life. We are all part of this planet, but in order for the land to nurture and sustain us, we must be generous in return and take care of our increasingly fragile ecosystems. And as we go out into our backyards and trails and local and national parks, it is also important that we acknowledge that these lands are the ancestral homes of Canada's First Peoples. For centuries, Indigenous peoples have been the stewards of the land, living in harmony with the natural environment. The onslaught of colonialism and urbanization has not only devastated Indigenous peoples' way of life, but has resulted in the loss of vital Indigenous knowledge and the careful balance between people and planet that they have sustained. So as we embrace the call to explore the beautiful Canadian landscape, let us do so with respect, seeking Indigenous guidance, accepting the wisdom of Indigenous practice, and above all, recognizing that we all have a responsibility to care for our generous land.
Come, oh come to the land, and come to the water of the earth. Oh, come to the forests and the lakes of Algonquin. Come to the Tamaracks and Canada Jay. Oh, come to the rivers of the St. Lawrence Seaway. Come to the channels of the Georgian Bay. To the grasslands and prairies of sunshine, come where the meadowlark is singing a song. Come to the foothills and peaks of Rockies, come with the golden eagle flying along. Come to the forests of redwood giants, come to the tundra higher than trees. Come with your cares of the world. To the morning breeze. Oh, sea. Come to the ocean, the mighty, mighty ocean, ocean. Come where the waves beat hard from the sea. Oh, come, oh, come, oh, come to the nations that carry our secrets. Come with the light in an endless storm. Come to the land that holds all our longing. Come with the wind that carries us home. Oh, come with singing, singing. Come with calling, come with greeting the earth and the sky. Come with singing, singing. Come with greeting, greeting. All of this beauty belongs to the earth. All of the majesty has given us our birth. All of this beauty belongs to the earth. All of the majesty has given us birth. Given to all the earth. Given to us all.
It's not at all been really a negative experience, but it just makes you wish you were in person.
In a group setting, in a virtual rehearsal, there's a lot of distractions like the internet, sometimes lags, there's technical difficulties, it's hard to hear each other.
So technology, I think, is the main thing that I find challenging. Getting a setup, and there's so many little things that could go wrong.
The biggest nightmare is setting up the camera. The microphone has been fine, but it's frustrating.
It's weird because I find that I focus on everything other than the singing until the first chord plays of the video that you're recording with, and it's sort of like, oh right, I'm supposed to be, because you're focused on what the background is like, and you're focused what you look like, and is there a hair out of place.
The first time I tried to put everything on one music stand, like my laptop fell off, and it was just a big kerfuffle. It did not go well.
In the recording process itself, I found personally, it was a bit tedious and isolating because you're all on your own singing with no one around. And I felt also that for me, I became very self-critical because I was obsessing over every detail in the recording as it went through.
For me, there's a little bit of a perfectionist aspect of, oh God, this take is not the best take. Am I going to send it in? Am I going to try another one? Am I going to just get more tired the next time I try it and it's going to be awful?
It's nothing that I expected, because like when I hear myself, you just hear all the flaws in it and everything. Like, you're just so hypercritical about it that you kind of forget what the ending product is going to be.
I'm also like one of those people who hates I think everyone hates listening to their own voice via recording. So that that's one of the downfalls of having to record yourself, is having to listen to yourself afterwards. And everyone's their own worst critic, so you do like 10 recordings.
And then also just getting around hearing myself sing and listening back to the recordings and kind of stepping out of, like, having a third party view, I guess, on what my singing was like, so I wouldn't over criticize or anything like that. I realized that I really hate the sound of my own voice.
But it still makes me really uncomfortable listening back to myself. I'm like, oh, that's not what I thought I sounded like in a choir, or like, oh, like, is this gonna blend? Like, I have no idea. And it's a little harder to stay in tune, I find. And breath control. I had a hard time with breath control when I was just me singing, and I wanted to be really, really careful about when I took a breath and how my phrases worked out. So it was really challenging in that way.
For me, it's sort of that self-conscious always, because you can always see yourself or you can hear yourself in a way that you don't get in a live in-person choir. You're sort of constantly aware of how you look or what you're doing with your body, or how your face looks when you sing, because that's never pretty. And so I hate that sort of self-conscious aspect of virtual choir.
just musically, it's obviously harder to get everything to work well together when you don't get to see the other performers performing at the same time as you. So it's just in terms, that's probably honestly the most like negative aspect for me. I mean, just because I like to be able to feel like something's polished and know that it's polished as I'm creating it normally in music, and just recording and having to wait and see other people's recordings, that whole concept is kind of alien to me in relation to normal choral performances.
The biggest difference has to be the fact that in a choral rehearsal, if you mess up, you have many other people around you who can fill in your shoes. They can fill in any breaths that you might need to take, they can hit any notes you might have sung improperly, and so on and so forth. But when you're responsible for recording your own lines, all of that is thrown out the window.
If you mess up, then it's all on you.
And also not getting the in-person experience. It's definitely more fun being in the same room as a bunch of people, because you feed off of each other's energy and you can build each other up.
Like, you don't have people around you, and I find that's such a big part for me about choir, is like learning with other people and being around other people. So it's weird to see their faces, but to not actually really be able to like interact with them.
So you're kind of stuck in your own echo chamber of, I think this is working, but I'm not really sure.
Learning this piece, knowing that I would never actually interact live with any other musicians to work it or present it or perform it, was a little bit sad and felt a little bit empty.
Singing alone when you're supposed to be singing with other people kind of sucks, because you just miss being in a room of sound and
Being a musician amid COVID has not been easy, but then nothing about COVID has been easy. One of the many challenges has been, while the activities that we love have stopped, the world's problems have not. Following the outbreak of COVID and the subsequent lockdowns, we watched in horror, feeling helpless from our homes as the news around us grew increasingly bleak. The growing case numbers of COVID and the mounting death toll, a massacre in Portapique, Nova Scotia, that claimed the lives of over 20 people. The horrific deaths of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Chantal Moore, and others, and the ongoing brutality and violence directed against Black, Indigenous, persons of color, and other vulnerable people. The xenophobic attacks targeting Asian North Americans and other ethnic groups. The growing toll that fear and isolation have wreaked upon our mental health. These will be forever entwined with our pandemic experience and have revealed how greatly in need of healing our society truly is. Composed in 2016, Kyle Peterson's Can We Sing the Darkness to Light asks us to put aside our pride, our judgment, our violence, and instead to be compassionate, to be tolerant, and to seek to recognize the humanity in all. Originally composed as an anti-war text, it speaks perfectly to the drastic need for change that has become even more urgent amid the stress of COVID. Of course, we cannot sing the world to right, or at least it will take far more than singing alone to fix what is broken. But if we all take the metaphor of a choir as a call to action, a call for us all to stand together and to unite our voices for justice and peace, then we can take a powerful step towards bringing the darkness back into light.
But I do miss having that basic like human interaction like with your friends and making music together, but it's still really cool to be able to do it, to make music virtually.
I think choir intrinsically is a community. It's a community based on singing, but it is a community of people being together and sharing in something deeply personal.
I just enjoy the social aspect of choir. I like to see my choir members say hello. I think it builds a good community, and I think when you have a good community, it makes the music learning more special and more effective.
I like being a part of things, and right now virtual is the only way to ever really be a part of anything musical right now.
It's a good substitute, but I'd definitely like to be back in person. But it's also rewarding in its own sense that you're getting to create this thing with a group of people when you can't see other people. So that's definitely a good thing.
It's just with the quarantine and with the pandemic, it's nice to be able to go back to something a little familiar, even if it is a different format. It's nice to be able to have music to work on and collaborate with people.
To see everyone kind of on the other side of these video calls and reminding yourself, everyone here is working on the same song that you are. Likely they're coming up with a lot of the same challenges that you are, but we're all figuring it out together. And so I found that both comforting and motivating, just remembering that you are a part of a bigger group that's all working toward this same goal.
And seeing everyone in the video kind of singing, and I mean in the most recent video doing some choreography together in a cohesive manner, that was really good. I feel like that kind of brings it back to the experience we're trying to capture as a virtual choir, because that's what choirs do. They're a group that go to one place and they sing for an audience, and I feel like the video itself really helped reconnect the music with the idea of a choir. So I think that was really great.
It was super nice, as I said before, just kind of that social aspect, especially in a time like now. It definitely wouldn't be nearly as rewarding if, it's people you see at school every day. But, not seeing them forever and then kind of seeing it all put together is really cool.
Whenever I think back to the videos that our choir has created, I do sense a feeling of gratefulness and thankfulness that they were able to pull something like this off. And that's why it's enjoyable for me to watch, because this is something that we all worked on together. And it's cool to see the fruits of our labor come to life.
My favorite part of virtual choir is hearing the final recording, or even in between recordings. But hearing everyone together singing is just so lovely. It's like a little surprise that you give to yourself, but then also like 20 people have also collaborated. It's so special and so wonderful to, you go from this sort of like limbo of I don't know what's happening, I don't know if I sound good, I don't know what this piece really sounds like, I don't know what our choir sounds like, and then you will come back with this beautiful recording of all of us together, and it's just so special. It's really lovely.
To see that thing at the end is a little bit of that thrill of like, look, there's a group together, kind of.
The pandemic has made me realize just like how important and how needed that music is in the world. Music is one of the best ways to communicate expressions and things that might not necessarily be able to be expressed through words. So I'm really grateful to be a musician, and I'm really excited to continue as a member of this virtual choir for this year.
A setting of an Appalachian folk tune composed by J. David Moore, Will the Circle Be Unbroken perfectly captures the spirit of choirs around the world that embarked on the steep learning curve that is virtual choir. In our video, you'll see us use the image of a heart. At least here in Nova Scotia, in the early days of the pandemic, people decorated the doors and windows of their homes with hearts to show their care and support for frontline workers. In addition to being a COVID symbol, the heart also represents the care and love that underpins all the music that is made by a choir, the bond that transcends the physical limitations of any rehearsal hall. Though the storm that is COVID has been a dark and difficult one to weather, the sun will shine again, and we will keep singing.
Will the circle be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by? There's a better home awaiting if we try, Lord, if we try. I was singing with my sister, with my brothers. I was singing with my friends, and we all can sing together, 'cause the circle never ends. Will the circle be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by? There's a better home awaiting if we try, Lord, if we try. I was born down in the valley where the stars refuse to shine. But I'm climbing up to the high mountain that makes that mountain mine. Will the circle be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by? There's a better home awaiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky. Will the circle be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by? There's a better home awaiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky. In the skies, Lord, in the I was singing with my sister and my brothers. I was singing with my friends, and we all can together.